Welcome to Reaching Minds, Thoughts for Your Life's Journey. In this podcast today, we will be exploring whether working globally does broaden our mind, and that in that experience, new cultures make us more adaptable. Is this just a cliché? Or do we get a tangible, mind-broadening effect from working across borders and time zones? To help us to understand these questions, we're joined by Richard Cook, Director of Global Excellence and a specialist in working globally. Now, before Richard has his piece, Richard is a seasoned expert in cross-cultural management with over 40 years of experience helping individuals and organizations navigate the complexity of working cross cultures. As a keynote speaker, consultant, and coach, he has advised global teams and leaders on how to collaborate effectively across borders. Having lived and worked in 4 continents, Richard brings not only a deep expertise, but also a rich first-hand understanding of the transformation power of global experience. Welcome, Richard.
Hi.
Okay, let's get going. Now, based on your experience as a director of Global Excellence and your own personal experience, how would you define working globally? Is it just international travel, or is there more to that?
I think the first thing to think about is when we say, I work globally, what do we mean? Because there could be all sorts of variations of that. You could be sitting in an office in London, for example, or Paris, and all of your work comes through your video calls, your team calls, emails, that sort of thing. And you never leave Paris, you never leave London, you never go to any of the places where the people that you're working with are based. So they're working globally as much as the person who gets on a plane and flies off to Hong Kong and spends a week with meetings in Hong Kong. So I think working globally is, in a sense, if we define what the opposite is, it might be easier. It's somebody who sits in their office, whether that be at home, virtually, but they only interact with people within their national boundaries and only people who are of the same nationality and cultural background as them. And you will know immediately the thing to say to that is that possible in this modern workplace that we all live in? And the answer is, yeah, somewhere in the country, there will be places where people are literally only interacting with their own nationals. But maybe those kinds of places are fewer and fewer as each year goes by, because global working is very much the norm for many people.
So just building on that one, what are some of the biggest misconceptions do you think people have, and maybe some challenges of global working and global collaboration?
It's a good question, and it varies, but I think one of the main things that goes on is it's a very human thing. We want to work with people who we agree with, who we feel comfortable with, who are like us in some way. So I know my team is in India or China or wherever they may be, but I want to find some connection. And when I discover that they like football, or they have a family, or they have the same car as me, or they like the same kinds of holidays, I feel good. I feel, oh, I've got a connection. And this looking for sameness, similarity, is something that we humans do to make us feel comfortable. We do it in our own cultures, and we start to do it as soon as we start to operate globally. The danger of it is that we're not looking for difference. We might be saying the differences are he or she is like me, we've got families, we've got teenage children, we go to the beach in the summer, and we might begin in that place of, I'm finding a connection, we got some similarities, we could be the same. We work for the same business, the same corporate headquarters. We share that. So that's dangerous in the sense, it's a good thing to do. Obviously, it's very human, but the danger of it is we overlook or avoid the differences. So when the differences do suddenly appear, we are in some ways more put on the back foot. We're more shocked. We're more a little bit disturbed. I thought I really knew the guys in Beijing, and now this email, this call, this contract situation, and they don't know what to do with it because they've spent a lot of time looking for similarities and not looking for differences. At the same time, I don't mean that therefore, as soon as you start working internationally, that you immediately start looking for difference. It's not a case of find the problem. It's probably more a case of be aware of your own presumptions, be aware of what you are, the way that you're set up as a human being, as an individual, to look for similarities and to share things, and just find a way to deal with difference, because difference will come along at some point, maybe sooner, maybe later.
Can you give an example of where maybe a leader who perhaps hasn't quite managed to communicate with their sort of counterparts in Beijing in a different way and it hasn't worked? Can you give some examples of that?
If we're talking about leaders, so they're not just a colleague or a peer. Suddenly somebody in the room, somebody on the call has more authority. So if we have a situation which is quite typical, you might have a team leader based in the US or UK or Europe somewhere, or wherever you might, Dubai. The leader could be there and they will come from a certain background. They will have a certain culture. They'll almost certainly be using English as the first language of business, even if it's not their first language. And that cultural background that they bring to the role will have a huge impact on what kind of leadership style is natural to them. And we can, perhaps that's a separate podcast about leadership styles, but you can imagine a kind of leadership style which is kind of dictatorial, kinds of, I tell you to do things and you do things. That kind of very straightforward, traditional leadership style is very prevalent around the world. The leader tells you what to do. You don't question him or her. Even gender. Are leaders in your country? Are there many female leaders in your country? Some countries will be more comfortable with that than others less. So that leadership style, out it goes. You've got a team in Beijing. You've got a team in Mumbai. And that leadership style doesn't sit comfortably. The expectation of what leadership should be will be culturally different and will be personally different. And most of us in offices and workplaces today, particularly in the West, we've got an idea that, my old boss was very controlling. Okay. My new boss is great. He or she lets me do what I want and I can go to them and that we use first names and all this sort of thing. So we're aware of these different personality styles of leadership, but a lot of these are culturally based. So when we as a leader, if we're coming from a Western place and we have a Western style of leadership, I believe in diversity. I believe in allowing people to make their own decisions to some degree. That may not work with your team in India or China. They may have expectations that you will be more authoritative. You won't say, "Oh, what do you think?" That may confuse them. They may go, "Why is he asking me? He's the boss. He should be telling me that's what the boss does." But and I've seen this so many times. In fact, you and I have probably seen it more times than we can count. You've got somebody who's brought up in a more liberal way, trying to use that style of leadership in Brazil or somewhere. And your Brazilian is looking for instruction, not a conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I want to go back to the theme of our podcast, which is working globally can broaden our mind. So in the context that you're describing, the leader or the individual working across borders with different cultures, does that necessarily broaden our mind?
And that's a really great place to stop and ponder. because if it is a cliche, travel broadens the mind, then revisited in the virtual world as global contact or global working broadens the mind. In both cases, in the traditional one of travel broadens, it depends what you've packed in your luggage. If you've packed an open mind, a non-judgmental way of looking at things, curiosity that is open and clear, the ability to sensitively ask questions and understand, make an effort to understand what's going on locally, if that's in your luggage, you will travel well. If you travel with, even if they're unconscious, biases, prejudices, one way to do things that's right, your way or the highway kind of approach, it's going to be a bumpy journey, even if you never leave the office, because you're just going to get frustrated. And I hear this all the time. Why don't they just do what they agreed? Or why don't they do what I just told them? They said yes, but they don't do it. And that question is focused on the other. So the other culture, the other person, the other party. And never is it looking at the self. How did you ask your question? I said, can you do? And what did they say? They said, yes, we can. And then you said, how soon can you do it? And what did they say? They said, we'll do it, we'll do it. I took that as agreement. So what would you say if I said to you, you are responsible for this problem in India or China or Malaysia or wherever? What do you mean I'm responsible? The way you asked the question was in a Western way. Simple questions with a yes-no answer. A lot of cultures, particularly in Asia, but not exclusively, have an idea that if you're the boss, you tell us what to do. The fact that you've asked it in the form of a question is simply confusing, but they'll still say yes because they take it as an instruction. That's the first thing. Secondly, you're asking them to autonomously make a decision about how long it should take. In a hierarchical, authoritative culture, that may not be appropriate for them to say, I think it'll take 12 weeks. Because you're going to say, what do you mean 12 weeks? Why will it take? They don't want that conversation. It's uncomfortable because they're giving you negative feedback. Giving feedback upward negative feedback in a hierarchy is a complete no-no in many countries. So you've brought your culture into the space. You've acted as if they're your own people. And then you are shocked and upset when they don't respond like your own people. So who's the fool?
Interesting, because the other thing that I want to ask you is that, in my experience, people often confuse language with culture. And they say, if I can only understand their language, that maybe I'll get on better with those individuals. How true do you think that is?
Is your question really, is it useful for me to learn the language of the people that I'm working with?
Yeah, but I know that people often say that the barrier to us not getting on across different cultures is language.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is, whereas my role might be to point out that there's also a cultural piece to that as well.
I think the way that it would be useful to think about it is language is a manifestation of culture. It is culture in a particular form, linguistic. So a lovely example is in British English. You say to somebody in the UK, how are you? And they say, fine. Now, they don't tell you that they've just had some bad news from the doctor, that one of their children is really ill, that they're thinking of getting a divorce, that they had a car crash yesterday, and they're having a really rotten day. So do the British lie? Is that how we should look at it, that the British can't tell the truth? Or should we say, let's get curious. Why would you say, oh, I'm fine, thank you, when really you're deeply troubled and upset and have had terrible things? Because we have a cultural idea that some things are private and some things are public. And if I don't know you very well, I won't share that. Now, that's not an unusual cultural idea. You'll see that in lots of cultures. But it gives you an example that the language must reflect the culture, and the value that you keep some things private is a cultural thing. The language is a manifestation of that, and it does the work of those cultural values and behaviors and ideas. And the other thing about language that's worth thinking about, because I often get clients, they come to me and say, can you fix the problem in the India office? And I say, what's the problem? And I get all this kind of shopping list of things. They say one thing but do another. They're very nice people, but they never deliver on time. And we can't understand their English sometimes, and they send very long emails. So we think maybe that they need some English classes. So what you're saying is if they have some English classes, all of your problems working with India is going to be resolved. We think that could be the case because let me show you one of their emails. And they show me this incredibly long, complex, flowery language email. So I said, if language is a manifestation of culture, what is the cultural norm that makes them send a long, flowery, complex email? Rather than focusing on the language they're using, what's behind that? So there's a bit of digging you need to do here about understanding the cultural norms, not the manifestation of it. It's almost like you're looking at the symptoms, but not the cause. So if you were a doctor, the pain in the knee is a symptom perhaps of a damaged muscle. Yeah, maybe you had an accident, maybe you were running and fell over, and now the bruising has gone down, but there is a constant pain. So don't focus on the pain. That's a short-term thing. Let's take a look at the muscle underneath. Maybe there's been some tearing or damage in that. So in the same way we look at a cultural issue, we can't fix your people in India. We can work with you to work with them better. If you're up for that, we can contract for that. So language, so you get this thing of, it goes the other way, Nita, as well. Because a lot of people carry this sort of generalization idea. Well, everybody uses English, so I'm just going to use my English and it's going to be fine. In other words, I'm not going to do anything special. I'm not going to change the way I verbally communicate, and that may extend into my emails, hence the flowery email. So the English is everywhere. Great, I can use English. I'm not going to change my English. So that's a bit of language myth, if you like. And then the other thing is, we can't understand the guys in India. It's a language problem. Let's give them some English classes. In both cases, these are myths. The guys in India have worked hard. English is probably their third or even fourth language. So they're pretty good. But it's the cultural stuff that moves the behavior. So you need to do something different.
So how does one begin to build some of the cultural sensitivity and understanding so that it leads to greater work harmony for people working cross-culturally?
I think the first thing that I have to throw out the window that you've provided me with is harmony is not going to be around. Working with people who are different at a distance, different time zone, harmony is not really going to be a regular feature of your relationship. I think you should aim for, as best as you can, open and clear and trusting relationships in which real conversations can take place.
What does that mean?
If you think about how do you build trust with people you work with? So the way that people build trust is culturally specific as well. So in the West, we have a tendency to believe that trust is, if I've got someone who comes to fix a plumber who comes to fix my broken toilet or bathroom, and he or she does a great job, and I think, yeah, they're good. And then I have another plumbing problem, and I get them. I don't think about it. I don't look at other plumbers, and they come and they fix my second problem. By the time they fix my third bathroom problem, you might be saying, if you're having so many problems in the bathroom, maybe they're not so good. But let's say that they are separate. I've got a very old house. Yeah, that's a good plumber. I'm going to recommend him. The guy next door says, oh, do I know a plumber? Yeah, I'll recommend him. So trust has been created through performance, consistent performance with clear results as expected. No surprises, no disappointments. That's one way to look at trust. But that's not the only way to look at trust. Other cultures may use other ways of thinking about trust. And again, if we look at Southeast Asia, trust is built up through your associations and your contacts and who do you know. So it sounds a cliche, but people do have little black books. They may be electronic now or digital, But I can remember working in the Middle East. I was at one point working with someone who was a journalist, and they would introduce me to people who were known as fixers. In other words, in the Middle East, they could get you any interview you wanted, or arrange the transport, make sure you had lunch, book the hotel, get the interview, get your recorded tapes back to the radio station or TV station. Fixers. They literally had little black books and a phone. And you would see them. They would have those little books. And that's what you have in a lot of countries. So who you know goes a hell of a long way, and you'll get doors opened which would not normally be open to just anybody turning up. So the trust is created by people and the connection that you have. You're a friend of mine. Unless you prove otherwise, I'm going to give you a job or allow you to sell me something or help you in your endeavors, your business endeavors in this country. So that's a different way of looking at trust. So that's the first thing. So your question, how do I build this trusting relationship? It's got to become human. It's got to become personal. And this is always the problem. So when I work with Westerners and they say, how do I do this? Do I just say, oh, how's your family? And that's where they go. That's the first thing that they go. They go, oh, yeah, he's got 2 sons and he does water skiing or something. And I say, that's all very interesting, but you have to do a little bit more than have a picture of your family on the desk. That's not enough to make you come across as a reliable, trusting human being. So you've got these 2 things, if you like, globally. You've got the Western style of performance is everything, consistent performance. Okay, we trust you. You've done it 3 times good. And we've got building human relationships where people can share personal information and maybe self-disclose something of a vulnerability. I'm struggling with this project, to be honest. That kind of thing can open up. But in other words, the thing that's missing for a lot of people is the EQ. In other words, the emotional intelligence. You do need a bit of that in order to be able to connect and build. And one of the things I say to people who are beginning to start a new team, and you've got people from different cultures in the team, is have one-to-ones with all your new team members before the big meeting where everyone gets introduced. And you just say, look, I'm your new team lead. I just wanted to spend 10 minutes and learn a little bit about you. I don't want to talk about the business or the work. I just want to find out, who you are and, what's important to you. And the key phrase there is, what's important to you? What is it that you do? I know you're great as an accountant or you're great as an engineer, or I've seen your CV. I've seen all the CVs. It's what is it about you that would be really something that you bring to the team? And this is a very personal, this is a confidential, and I'm going to share first. So there's something about making the first move. And so what you're doing is you're putting very important core values, if you like, for the team up front. So you're saying, as a leader, I'm trying for transparency. As a leader, I'm as open as I can be. As a leader, I'm happy to share personal things. I'm not a closed book. As a leader, I reach out and connect with people because I think that people are the most important part of any business project team. So you're already making these statements by your behavior. Then you have your big meeting with everybody and everybody's already met you, but one-to-one. And so now you can begin to get people to connect with each other and to share so that first meeting, half an hour of that first meeting when you get them together should be around the same things, around share something important to people, and then talk about what values and things will make this team the best team it can be. So none of that's about the business. But if you spend that time at the beginning of setting up a new global team, you will find that team will stay together better, share better, resolve crises better, and get the job done better. And it'll be more fun.
So if someone who is a novice at working internationally, globally, and they came to you, what would be the piece of advice would you give them as they begin their role with another culture across time zones?
So if this person has only stayed in their own country, lived in their own country, if I were just checking in with them at the beginning, I'd say, what's been your experience of working or studying with people who are different from yourself? Because the thing that's important is what's in your luggage again. Who are you? What's your approach to diversity, to difference? Have you got one way to run a meeting? What happens if you like to stick to an agenda, point one, point two? What if people jump to point three? How do you feel about that? What would your reaction be in a meeting if that was happening? So what are you bringing? And how well do you know yourself? And I think that I would get them to self-reflect. I would not go, well, then in India, this is important, and in China. That's too much information too soon. They can find that out at a later stage. Right now, they need to decide how, in a conscious way, and I stress the word conscious, you don't just turn up and go, this is me, hey, I'm going to be my natural self. I think that's a recipe for disaster. You need, in a conscious way, to decide, how do I want to do this international work? What am I going to bring to it? What attitudes, behaviors am I bringing? What might I need to question in my own ways of doing things? And how am I consciously planning to respond when I'm faced with something that is vastly different and complex?
I guess what you're touching on, which you touched on earlier on, is around developing emotional intelligence. It's about reflecting in terms of my own values and what I'm bringing. And I guess there's a phrase I have when I'm working with individuals who are working across cultures, is to say, wherever you go, there you are. So understanding yourself is a very important element of how you begin to interact with other people, because at the end of the day, we will still make some assumptions. However, if we've done some pre-work on ourselves, at least that kind of maybe leads us to perhaps having a more open mind and a broadened mind, as opposed to, as you were explaining, is I'll do whatever I'll do because it makes sense to me now. And I'm successful here, so therefore I will be successful over there, which, as we know, is not always the case. So the last question I want to ask you is that for someone who's traveled enormously and lived in several continents, if you were to give your younger self one piece of advice about working across cultures, what would that be?
Don't take everything too personally.
Say a bit more.
It's often not about you. The perceived snub or apparent difficulty or personality clash, or the lens through which you're experiencing everything and seeing everything, is a very narrow personal cultural lens. And the ability of that lens to fully understand and interpret what you're seeing, feeling, and hearing in your international counterparts is questionable. So there's almost a thing of you can't trust yourself. In other words, the skills, attitudes, beliefs, values, and practices you've learned since birth up to this point, they've got you here, but they won't get you there, because the equipment is for a different job. You need new gear. You need new learning, new skills, new approaches. They got you here. That's absolutely fine. But they won't take you to the next phase if you're now suddenly working globally. So you just need to be mindful. And I know what you were referencing. So I've been very successful in my own country with this. I've been a great manager. I've got all sorts of awards and everybody loves me. So I'll find managing the team in Moscow easy peasy. Wrong is the answer to that, because what got you from there to here will not get you from here to, and it's that simple. And one of the questions, just perhaps to round this up, one of the questions that comes up again and again when people are talking about, I've got a problem with the guy I'm working with in Dubai, or I've got a problem with the guy in the States, and there's a problem. Okay, if a problem comes up, reflect on yourself first. Don't go Sherlock Holmes on the poor chap or woman, because you don't have the right lenses. So it's going to be confusing. One of the things that happens, particularly with Westerners, is they do a reductionist approach. It's either something around language or it's something about culture or it's about personality. Those are the three things that they pull together. And the truth is, all three could be operational at the same time.
Absolutely.
It's not like one of these things is going to be. So we get a little bit detective. We think we see so many detective movies and we want to solve this. Why is my boss in New York so rude? It's personality. Or that's just how they speak. Language. Okay. Or it's culture. Yeah, they're aggressive in New York. It's a thing. Okay, it could be all three of those.
So,
all two of them.
Bringing this to a close and to our theme about working globally broadens the mind, what might be 2 or 3 tips you could give to someone listening to this podcast?
I think I'd come back to the initial question: does working globally broaden the mind? And in the same way that does travel broaden the mind, the answer is yes, it can, but it doesn't automatically do. And I have lived abroad and seen people living abroad alongside me in all of the major cities of the world who have learned nothing, who only hang out with their own people and can't wait to return home, but talk to their friends, oh, I'm having a great time, I'm living abroad. But they've acquired nothing. No humility, no openness, no curiosity about the local culture. They eat their own food, they hang out with their own people, they don't learn the local language. It's a wasted opportunity and it will not broaden those minds. So that could easily be your experience of sitting in an office in Swindon and you've got a team in India. You could easily be that person and just be frustrated on a regular basis. So the tips, it always comes back down to know yourself. You've got 2 things in motion. You've got us, ourselves, and you've got the others, whether they're on the end of a screen or whether they're in the office and you're visiting the office, you've flown over. Always look at yourself first. Understand what you're bringing and what are your trigger points. Your trigger point could be if meetings don't start on time, I get very judgy. If people overtalk other people in meetings, I don't like that and I try and stop that. Or I never get a chance to get a word in because everybody's talking, so I never manage to contribute in the meeting. Is it personality? Is it culture? Is it me being shy? I don't know. Know yourself. If you find you're dealing with cultures who overtalk and interrupt each other in meetings, for the moment assume this is acceptable because clearly more than one person is doing it and they're from the same culture. Therefore, your question is, how do I get my point in? Now, you may need a cultural confidant to do that, somebody in the office of that culture who can say, listen, let me tell you a little bit about, this is quite normal in our culture. It's just enthusiasm. It's just energy. We don't leave gaps for people to jump in like you do. Oh, so how can I get my point? Just jump in. Oh, I can't do that. It's rude. Okay, so you've got a belief in your package that interrupting is rude. How useful is that belief? You've got to question it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I want to round up this podcast with a quote, which I love, from Edward T. Hall, which goes, just because you're in the vicinity of a culture doesn't make you interculturally competent.
Yes, very true.
I love that phrase. I think that is too. It's so true. Thank you, Richard, for your insights and your explanation about how we can broaden our minds.
And it was a pleasure coming on your podcast, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. If you're interested in working with me, connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, or www.nitisharma.com. And if you enjoyed the podcast, why not consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you have access to your podcast, and leave a review.